Wonderful, Brill. So let me just grab that. So just to welcome everybody in, we're still waiting for Mark Allenton. His dreaded laptop has gone for an infamous MS365 restart, so he'll join us in a second, but I'll do his intro in a little bit. So we're joined by Zoe and Andrew, as well as Mark, to talk about a bit about the block. So we've got a bit of a different afternoon where we're going to be able to ask some questions about certain block journeys and how they've been getting on, and hopefully present some new and different ideas. So I'm hoping this will be a bit of an engaging session, a bit interactive. So I would be happy if you have any questions or any points that you'd like to raise with the panel, then please feel free to use the chat, even if it is to talk about Mr. Burnham. Happy with that as well. So I will get ourselves started. And Andrew, would you mind just introducing yourself? And the first question will be after that is, where are you at with your block journey?
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Ireland. I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor for Students and Teaching at the University of Lancashire. I'm also the head of our Burnley campus, and I am the strategic lead for a transformation program about a move to a 30 credit framework and a block model of operation. And we are about 3 years into what is like a 7-year overall project, where we've got staggered different start dates of reviewing portfolios in different schools and transforming the curriculum and the pedagogy into a block model and then implementing it. So it's staggered over about a 7-year period in total. So we're about year 3 of that journey.
Wonderful. Brilliant. Zoe, same intro and same question, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zoe Allman. I am an Associate Dean Education at De Montfort University. We are at the point of having started our block delivery in the 22-23 academic year, having made the decision to switch just the year before, actually. So for us, it was a very quick sort of turnaround from decision making and governance through to planning how to get through all of that to be ready to deliver from the following autumn. So having started in the 22-23 year, we had our first set of undergraduate 3-year cohorts through last year, so they completed and graduated, and then there were some programs who went the following year just due to sort of external accreditation reasons, needing to take a little bit longer with their planning, so they are coming up for their first graduating cohorts this year. So that's where we're at with it. We've transitioned, I think it's about 85% of our academic profile across to block, and that's undergraduate and postgraduate as well.
Wonderful. Emma, is there another question that you would like to go into now?
Certainly, and briefly, I'll just, for colleagues from Portsmouth who possibly don't know myself, I'll just very quickly introduce NMITE, and I think I've got at least one NMITE colleague on the call. Hi, everybody, my name's Emma Lewis. I'm Head of Quality Assurance at NMITE, which is the New Model Institute for Technology and Engineering. If you haven't heard of us, we're a small new provider in Hereford, set up to basically try and address one of the shortfalls in the number of engineering graduates going out, and also set up in a cold spot in Hereford. We have been, and I say this a lot, block from the beginning. So it's one of the sort of innovative parts of our pedagogy about how we deliver learning. It's been block since day one. We got new degree awarding powers in September 23. So whilst we've been involved in conversations around sort of what block means and block sector in the UK for quite a while now. But I was going to say, in terms of questions to follow up to next question, Jamie, do you want me to address? I was wondering if Mark wanted to come in first before we move in.
I'm waiting for, is he in the room?
He's in the room.
He's in the room. He's in charge. Hello, Mark.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, I've been here for a little while, actually.
Oh, wonderful.
Mercifully quick restart.
Oh, brilliant. So my question was to introduce yourself, Mark, to the group, as well as where are you at with your block journey?
Yeah, thank you. I did hear all of the earlier speakers as well. So So we at the London campus, satellite campus of the University of Portsmouth, we have been block from the start. So it was designed into the proposal for a London campus for Portsmouth University that we would be block. So in a sense, we're not talking about a transition from a traditional model to a block model. However, we have actually had a transition since. So we started by running 7 courses that exist in the main campus and are taught not in block, and teaching those existing courses in block here, which was a real learning curve for us. And then on the back of a university-wide large curriculum change project, not entirely dissimilar to the one Andrew described at the beginning, so moved to mostly 30 credit modules. On the back of that, we've had to redesign all of our courses. So we have had a transition, but not from something to block, but from one form of block to another form of block. And I think where we are on our journey is finding that having the opportunity to redesign courses for block has worked infinitely better than a kind of lift and shift of existing courses to block. And that might be something that we can come back to a little bit later. So we are starting our newly designed curriculum in September.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Jamie. Shall I I've got next question for our panel members.
Yes, please.
I was going to almost, then it's the why is my question to you all, is what drew you to block? Why did you decide to use block as a methodology, curriculum delivery, however you conceptualize it? And just to break it up a bit, I'll go to Zoe first.
Thanks, Emma. So for us, it was very much, so De Montfort, for anyone who doesn't know, it is based in Leicester. We're right next to Leicester City. Obviously, we've got the University of Leicester very close by and Loughborough University in close proximity. But actually for us, it was about thinking, what is it that responds best to what our students are telling us they need and that they want? And so really it was the student experience that was driving our consideration and what to do next, really, in terms of what the curriculum should look like, and also thinking about how we can best position ourselves in terms of what our students want, and applicants, I suppose, if we're thinking about before they've even joined us as students, what their aspirations are, what they want to be able to do, and sometimes that's alongside study, so recognising that need to work and other things that are often happening as well, or caring responsibilities and other things, but also thinking about where is it our students are likely to want to go, and the places they're sort of gaining graduate entry to. So all sorts of things like that. And a comment that I think sort of Andrew and Mark have both alluded to as well, for us as well, over time we drifted to a range of different credit frameworks and credit sizes. So again, it was that consistency piece as well. And like others, we've moved to a 30 credit sort of approach as standard. So it's that approach of aiming for delivery that was consistent, credit sizes that were consistent, and actually in terms of things like sort of making things clearer for everybody, so that there was clearer regulations because there was greater consistency across a number of the structures and the frameworks. But really the original sort of driving sort of force in that was thinking about our student feedback and where we wanted to position ourselves to be future facing.
Thanks, Zoe. I was going to say the same question to Andrew.
Well, it's pretty much the same response, actually. So thank you, Zoe. You kind of said what I was going to say. I mean, actually, we work quite closely with De Montfort. We're a bit behind the curve following De Montfort, but we've learnt a lot from De Montfort about the process. And we've done it in our own way, of course. But a lot of the things Zoe said are exactly the same. I mean, I've advocated for quite a long time that we don't have any full-time students. They may be on full-time courses, but they're not full-time students. You know, they've all got part-time jobs. Most of them got caring responsibilities. They've got busy, complicated lives. And the block model enabled us to move to a situation where there's less context switching. They're focusing on one thing at a time, which they're juggling amid their array of other things in their life, not multiple modules at the same time. So the 30 credit framework we introduced was a way of being more efficient. It meant moving from 20 credits to 30 credits, so we could reduce overall the number of modules. that was an important efficiency drive. And as alongside that, a pedagogic refresh about a block model of delivery, phasing assessments so that it's not all bunched up, but it's like, all those key things are all part of it. And the other strategic driver, if you like, was the lifelong learning entitlement, which is where we started with our move to 30 credit modules. So our first foray into the block approach was thinking about hop on, hop off agile modules for lifelong learning entitlement, and then we took that concept and decided to undertake an institution-wide shift to enable that in the future to happen more readily.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll go to Mark then finally for that question.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So once again, very, very similar reasons. So there's not much to add to what Zoe and Andrew have already said. So I think student experience is the prime driver. The ability to focus on one thing at a time, which students are already telling us it really helps. The ability to avoid assessment bunching because they do the assessment straight after each module. Students being able to organise their lives. So we don't just have block in the London campus, we have more or less a fixed timetable. So students more or less can say from the day they start with us that their timetable is going to be roughly the same for the duration. So we have a lot of students who are working, as you said, Andrew. We also want to allow for people who might have caring responsibilities that they can organise their lives with fewer interruptions. The other thing that I think from a student experience or more on our learning and teaching side that I think is part of our motivation is the university as a whole has championed active blended learning for quite a number of years. But the pace of being able to really move over the curriculum to active blended learning has been very patchy in the main campus, I think it's fair to say. In London, because we were a kind of blank sheet, we were able to sort of on the back of a different model, or it's almost an excuse to think about everything from scratch. And so clearly block teaching means some more intensive learning. And if you want to have your learning workshop based, which we do, it works really well for us. So our brand new campus has no lecture theatres. We have no plans ever to build a lecture theatre. We are entirely workshop based with a maximum of 30 students in a class. So that's all on the student experience side. There are some sort of logistical operational efficiencies. I wouldn't necessarily say that they were built into the reasons why we did block from the beginning. That was already decided before myself and indeed the principal of the London campus even started. But we were able to, on the back of block, introduce a carousel where we now have what you called hop on, hop off. We have 3 intakes a year on all our courses, undergraduate and postgraduate, and students join and then take whatever modules are running in the term that they join. That, with the new curriculum starting in September, has been made even more efficient by clustering business courses together, computing courses together, and project management courses together, where there are some modules now that will be shared across more than one degree program. So all in all, it's a very efficient model for what is still a very small campus.
Thank you. I was going to say it's very interesting for me to hear as someone an institution that is also doesn't have lecture theatres and designed into studios that take a maximum of 30, that another institution has done the same thing. Mark, it's really interesting. Before I hand over to you, Jamie, can I ask a quick follow-up question based on that one? Was there any, if I ask it all of you, or just let me know if you want to step in, was there a specific thing that drove you to make this change? You've sort of spoken very well about why block, but was there a particular catalyst of we need to make a change, and block was the answer to that? Was there a particular thing that pushed you in that direction, or you knew you had to make a change somewhere and block was the answer to that? Andrew?
I think we weren't doing as well with retention as we should have been able to do. So I think retention was a big driver, and we saw, from the global block community that, retention of students was something which was a real positive from block, nurturing that sense of that cohort identity. And so that was one of the primary drivers, alongside lifelong learning, and just the move to a 30 credit structure. So there's a number of different things all intertwined, but I didn't mention retention before, and I think that's really important. It's a really difficult area to ensure you can support students to not just access, but succeed in their educational journey, particularly in widening participation universities such as ours. So we saw it as a really important way of rethinking delivery to enable them to succeed. So I just thought I'd add that in.
Thanks, Andrew. I can see we've got a hand up, and Jamie, if you're happy to, shall I just take a quick question? And in fact, I'll say to everyone, please do we are going to make sure there's time for general questions at the end as well. Feel free to put something in the chat as well. But Colston, I hope I've said that right. You've got your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Yes. There are some disadvantages of block, particularly in terms of the student experience. I remember a long time ago at University of Surrey, we used to do all-day teaching on a Saturday, which I take to be block mode, but once a fortnight. And the disadvantage there was that none of the campus facilities were available on a Saturday. And also, the loos didn't get cleaned at weekends. So that's the first one. The second thing elsewhere was that where we were doing a Friday and a Saturday 2-day block, but 3 2-day blocks spread over about 6 weeks or so. And there, of course, the other difficulty is that if a student misses part of a block, either just one day or maybe the whole 2 days, then they've missed actually a substantial portion of their program. And that can be a bit more difficult to deal with. So there are these, as I say, disadvantages of block modes in terms of the student experience, which I think are worth exploring. Particularly the first one, because we all know that universities are still set up mainly for undergraduate 18-year-olds full time.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Colston. That's really interesting. So we put our hand up straight away because I think you've pointed to some challenges as well, which we were having some questions later. But Zoe, do you want to come in on that? Because I think one of there's so many things that Colston said that I think chime with quite a few of us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Colston. That's a really good point about the campus facilities. And we experienced exactly that. And I think sort of one of the learning points for us was actually, whilst we'd done a lot of work to make sure that everything was in place to make these structural changes, there were sort of key elements or stakeholders across the campus that hadn't necessarily realised when the change was happening or quite what that meant in terms of when facilities needed to be open or when the cafes, I think was a particular one at our institution, when those needed to be available for students. So one thing I will say that we did, and that perhaps sort of enabled us a little better, was that actually, because we had already published our academic calendars for the following sort of, I think, sort of 3 to 5 years, we did stick to within those published academic calendars. Now, that did create in itself its own challenges. It created sort of a positive because students who were signed up knew what they were getting and when those weeks sort of teaching would occur within. It created those challenges for actually making sure we could get through the structural delivery and all of the other things that come with making sure that academic experience works. So at least we were sort of working within the constraints we've got, and then once we were out of those sort of published windows, we could then review that more broadly with block in mind. And the other point you mentioned about, what happens if a student gets ill or anything like that, understandably, student life and life continues, doesn't it, while students are studying. So we had to revisit all of our things around regulations and policies around extenuating circumstances. We also revisited all of our things around assessment and feedback policies, looking at our feedback times so that feedback wasn't just feedback and wait for it. It was actually feeding forward so that you'd get it in reasonable time so that it could inform what you then did in the next block along, because our blocks are sort of sequential. So, but yeah, really, really good points, because those sort of challenges, if you don't think about them, can actually come back to get you. So good points to have raised. Thank you.
Andrew, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to all of those points, I mean, everyone's got a different view about what you mean by the word block. And I think this is really important because when I have conversations with people in my university, sometimes they will say, block won't work for my course. And I thought, well, hang on, you don't even know what I mean by block. You know, I mean, we just heard there, and I quite agree, Colston, you know, a version of block could be teaching all day on a Saturday, or it could be teaching over like 7 weeks, one module, which is our default block model. But we've also got a block model, which is 2 modules running concurrently for 14 weeks. So we've got a number of iterations on block, and there's some choice there about subject and best fit and the makeup of the students, you know, those sorts of things. But I think it's really important that whenever we're talking about block, is we find ways to really clarify what we mean, because there are lots of different interpretations of it. And the other point is, yes, whole institutional transformation is key. I mean, we see this anyway in the normal. I agree. Universities are mostly set up for like your traditional undergraduate student, Monday to Friday, but of course people don't like teaching on a Friday, and Wednesday afternoons is for sport, isn't it? And maybe the preschool centre finishes at 5 and we're trying to timetable teaching until 6. So there's all sorts of real tensions in timetabling activities. And I think one of the things about the lifelong learning entitlement, which you'll hear me bang on about quite a lot, I suppose, is it is an opportunity to kind of like rewire all of our thinking about what we mean by that traditional experience of higher education. But that isn't just an academic thing. That's got to be all joined up right across the university. So estates teams, digital teams, you know, the catering outlets, everyone has got to be part of that. And that takes a lot of sustained energy and effort to keep going. So we've introduced like a sprint model of course design and validation, which we use as to move into a block model. But ironically, keeping the momentum going across institution, moving to block is not a sprint. It is a marathon. You've got to keep that sustained energy going over a long period of time to bring people along with you. And so I would also say not to underestimate how difficult that can be in a busy environment. There's lots of different agendas. Keeping everyone focused on a big transformation is really important, but also difficult.
Thanks, Andrew. I was 2 points before I hand back to Jamie for the next question. Is one, Colston hit on something that I think is so true, and Andrew and Zoe have talked about this, is I'm often the professional services person in a space of mainly academics, and the one saying, please, if you are switching to block or even developing block, get your professional services in the same room as you to have the conversations, because every single person I've spoken to has tripped up, particularly about assessment. When are your assessment boards happening? And as an institution that is block and accelerated, trust me, timing of assessment boards, even in a very small institution, is my annual headache. And making sure that how those resits happen, because as Colston said, life happens, and students, if they miss a week of a 7-week block, that hits differently. And the other thing was just to say to colleagues that within IBILTA, John Weldon, who he's in Australia, and I'm going to forget the name of the institution, he's a professor over there. He's actually doing a piece of research at the moment through IBILTA, which is around what do we mean by block? Are there definitions of what it is and what it isn't, and where are we comfortable? And that's producing some interesting things. And like, can you do two blocks at a time? Is that allowed? So that will keep being promoted through IBILTA. So if you're interested, do watch this space, because he's working through that at the moment. But I'll hand over to Jamie for the next question now.
Wonderful. Unless Mark wanted to chime in on that last point, or are you happy to move on, Mark?
I will just say one thing. So interesting, I think we have had challenges in London, Portsmouth, but they're not the challenges that Colston mentioned, actually. And I think perhaps being a campus where everything is block is different to moving to block in a campus where not everything is block. So We don't have any of those particular issues around availability of spaces or maintenance or any of that. And we don't have the issue of students missing entire modules, because a bit like Andrew was saying, our modules run over 7 weeks, not just one weekend. But we have had other kinds of challenges around things like assessment reports, which you mentioned, Emma. The one thing that I would say about Block is it is a way of also finding creative solutions. Once you start thinking about such a radical redesign, other creative solutions seem to come along. So we, in terms of our Block here in London, when we did focus group work with the students, some of them told us that they wanted we have 2 days of teaching and then some asynchronous work. Some of the students told us they want the 2 days to be consecutive days, because they want to be able to maximize the time they can work for other days of the week. The other half of the students said they didn't want the modules, the blocks to be consecutive, because they need time to process, integrate, prepare between sessions. So what we've done is we do have them on 2 days, but they have a morning one day and a late afternoon, early evening the next day. So that is a way of actually meeting both of those demands, because those who want a break do still get the whole of the morning and the early afternoon on the second day to process and prepare for the second one. But those who wanted them to have them on consecutive days still have them on consecutive days. So I think that there are kind of really interesting ways of designing Block in a way that maximizes the stakeholders, the benefits for stakeholders, basically, which is challenging but also exciting.
Wonderful, thank you, Mark. Yeah, just going to move on to the next question, and I hope I'm going to phrase this right, because I think my experience with working with the London campus is we couldn't help but draw upon what other institutions was up to. Thinking about the University of Suffolk, I think, was one of those primary things. So I'm hoping this question really links. Thinking about what drew your informed approach to Block is kind of where did some of those ideas come from, but also I kind of wanted to think about, well, what might have been some benefits that have come out of teaching on the Block that weren't anticipated? What's something that's come out that might not necessarily have been there that you predicted? Anybody would like to start? I'm all good. I won't pick on you. Go for it, Zoe.
Thanks, Jamie. I think for us, like you've mentioned, Suffolk and a few other places, we also look to quite a few places in the States and things who'd done this, and Australia as well. And I think it was about trying to almost, I think Andrew mentioned, you get these blockers where people will say, oh, it can't possibly work for us. And actually you haven't even started having the conversation properly. So what we were trying to do very early on was just sort of understand, how have other places made this work? And in particular, what we tried to do wherever possible was almost to have those discussions at a discipline level, so that we'd got, particularly in our areas of healthcare and nursing and midwifery and things like that, not that colleagues at De Montfort were necessarily saying it wouldn't work. It was more the question of, well, how does that work? Because there's so many other constraints and things that we have to be thinking about. How do we radically change our curriculum and our approach? So I think there was a lot of kind of just trying to understand how others in the sector had done it, and I think that's what we've done. And I think what I wish we'd done a bit more of is planned our evaluation approach as we started. I think we were very keen to get into it, and we got going, and we did some very early surveys with students and staff. How were things going? We had rapid response meetings in the morning, in case anything went horribly wrong on those first few weeks of delivery, all of those kind of things, the teething problems that you get at the start of any academic year, but the start of an academic year where you've changed your delivery mode in particular. And actually, to be fair, those meetings were fairly quiet. By the time we'd got to them, we'd anticipated most things that came up. But what I now realise in hindsight, as a researcher who's trying to sort of understand the student and staff experience a bit more, is that we don't necessarily have any data points that run over a long period of time where we ask the same questions, or we sort the same information. So it's kind of like trying to piece the picture back together. So that would be my little hint for anyone. If you're about to embrace this journey, think about actually how you're going to evaluate it. What are your time series data points going to be, so that you can actually see the measurable differences without having to kind of craft a story around what you've ended up getting.
Thank you, Zoe. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, we're currently undertaking like a longitudinal evaluation of our first courses that are moved to block, but we're running that over a 3-year period to see how those students develop their skills and awareness and understanding over the time they're a student. So we're trying to gather the input as we go to course correct as necessary, using various in-flight indicators that be fairly straightforward, but also build up that accumulative picture, which I think is also really important. But the one thing I was going to say, which we got from De Montfort specifically, who participated very kindly in a Kickstarter conference we did at the university, was the concept about not lifting and squishing your existing modules into like a kind of a consecutive delivery format, which I think is really obvious, quite honestly, but it's important to spell it out, because otherwise academics are very much wedded to their modules, and you've got to kind of leave all that at the door when you go into the design space and think back to basics about that backwards design. What are the skills and competencies you want your graduates to have for this course, and work backwards, developing that sort of spiral curriculum. And then the other thing which I got from I built a conference in Sussex last year, was it, or the year before, which was fascinating. But it was about how you design modules to feed into each other, so you build up knowledge over time, versus another different method, which is the sawtooth method, where every module starts with 0 knowledge, and you build up the knowledge, and then you go back to 0 for the next module, you build it up. And both have got validity, but then they're not necessarily compatible with this mixing cohorts onto the same modules. They might be, but it depends on how you design the course. So if you've got students doing a 3-year journey and you've got students hopping on for one module, it may or may not work bringing them together. And that's one of the comments in the chat is about that as well. It might work, but you've got to design it very carefully to not disadvantage either group. One of the ways to support that is by allocating personal tutors very specifically to a personal tutor can support students who are just hopping on and hopping off. They've got a very different journey and support needs than students who are part of that longitudinal journey where you're chaining the modules together. Just some thoughts from me anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. Mark?
Yeah, once again, I echo some of the things that have already been said. We worked quite closely at the very beginning with Victoria University in Australia. Before I joined Portsmouth, I had a conversation with some of your colleagues, Zoe, in Leicester and De Montfort. And then Jamie and I did a really valuable trip to Suffolk, where we found out a lot from their experience. I think the only thing that I have to, be completely honest about is there are some questions that you wish you'd asked earlier, and they're the most valuable ones, the ones that you didn't ask. And I think looking back, if we were doing this again, I think we might have pushed back at the beginning around lifting and shifting existing courses. I think we might have actually said, this is not going to work. We need to redesign them to deliver them in block, which is what we've ended up doing. But after 2 years of some of the pain of trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole. Questions, advice from others, really great. But the most valuable questions are the ones you fail to ask, I think. In terms of evaluation, sort of since we started, I think there's some issues there, because obviously education is such a slippery area in terms of data, quantitative data, We know that our student satisfaction for modules that we're running here relative to the same modules running in Portsmouth are often higher. But whether we can attribute that to block is absolutely moot, because we teach very differently. So many of the modules that we are running here, the Portsmouth versions are lecture delivered with then workshops or seminars afterwards in sometimes bigger groups with scattered timetables. So I think it's very difficult to say that there's any causality between the fact that we might be doing better with student satisfaction and indeed in some cases on results. We can't necessarily attribute that to block. It could be any one of a number of factors that are different. Our small class sizes, for instance, probably feed into that as well. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Emma, do you think we should move on to the next question? We'll save the questions from the chat to the end.
I think let's move on to the next question, but I have, just to reassure Ryan and Dan, I'm making little notes as we go through some follow-up questions. But shall we move on to, I was going to say, and I think what Mark's just said leads quite nicely into really a question around how do you think block teaching and delivery is shaping the student learning experience in your context, and what evidence you've found about that as going forward as you've moved into block and through block. I can be quite mean and pick on people, so I'm going to go to Andrew first, be really mean.
That is really mean, Emma. I think the key thing for us has been the sense of belonging. It works differently, doesn't it, in different types of courses. Engineering is very different to acting, for example. So some subjects can engender that real sense of that cohort identity, that sense of belonging easily. Others, it's more challenging. But actually, when you've got a set group and they're seeing through that same more intensive period of time, that's really helped. And that has led to improved retention rates, which was our primary goal, and engagement in general. Attendance and engagement is very strong. So those things I think are very helpful. And actually, Mark mentioned active learning, and that's definitely one of the key pedagogic shifts that we've really tried to work towards, to shape the student learning experience by placing that learner at the heart of their own educational experience, moving away from that sort of transmission, from the educator model, which itself has enabled us to engage academics with a much broader range of pedagogical tools, online and face-to-face, to improve the student learning experience. But all the time, it's got to be anchored into the different subject requirements, and we've tried to make sure we've nuanced our approach very much to what works for engineering will be different to what works for acting or journalism or business. So we try to create the parameters within which there's some flexibility and therefore buy-in and ownership from the academics. It's not always quite as simple as all that, but that's the overall intention.
Thanks, Andrew. I was going to say it chimes with a lot of what you hear from colleagues who work in block, that piece around using it because they think it does something about student belonging, which is so key to that link between belonging and engagement and attendance. I think has been quite a central piece. You hear a lot of people moving into block. I was going to say, Mark or Zoe, did you want to come in on that?
I'm happy to do so, if that's okay, Mark.
Zoe.
Yeah, so really interesting. So I've been doing a piece of work with some colleagues, actually specifically trying to ask our students about, block and how it's felt and things. And we deliberately tried to engage students who knew university life pre-block, if you like. So we had sort of long, thin modules, but for some reason or other, they sort of the curriculum structure caught up with them. So just for context, we had designed for the majority of students to start, for example, level 4, and then their level 5 would roll in as they progressed into level 5. And then, so the idea was a student really shouldn't see any difference. But I think we came up with about 23 different scenarios in which you would not necessarily fall into that. For example, you may have gone on placement or had a leave of absence, or for some reason something had happened that you ended up sort of slightly out of alignment with your cohort. What was really interesting was students who sort of were feeding back to us who'd only ever known block. Their sort of view was, well, why are you asking me this question? This is just how university is. I don't know any different. Okay, that was great, quite useful. Interestingly, we had more students feeding back actually that they'd experienced a similar type of approach at their prior studies, so further education or wherever they'd been previously, which was more so than we were expecting. The students who perhaps had been through that change and therefore were able to sort of sit back and say, oh, well, they could reflect on both positives of both approaches, which I thought was really interesting, and often actually projected what they thought others might be feeling. So not necessarily their own views, but sort of said, oh, well, I could see that, it was, nice to have longer to think about things in the pre-block approach, as they often refer to it. But actually, I quite like getting some of my modules done out of the way, particularly on topics that I wasn't that interested in. So real mixed bag in terms of student feedback and that experience piece. But I think what's been useful to us, and I alluded to it earlier, was, and I'm sure others have as well, we've had to adapt and shift around a lot of our processes and procedures to make sure that they work. So with that, we changed our whole approach to annual review and enhancement. And so that's helped us to put in structural points within the year to be able to actually engage students properly, to look at what data sets we've got and what they're telling us. And I think, like others have said, it's an iterative thing, looking at what interim data that you've got that can help you to see what you need to know mid-year, so you're not always waiting till the end of a year to do something about it. So I think that's a piece of sort of that learning journey that we're still on, is about how can we learn from the data that we're getting throughout the year and sort of be adaptive in year as well as appropriate.
Mark, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you. So I think certainly the idea of community or belonging, I think, is part. So there is a sense around cohorts. The fact that the way we do block anyway, they are literally only doing one module at a time, so they have that very intense experience. They really get to know their lecturer, and I think if you combine that with our small size, it does help that community feeling that we know our students' names. And in some cases, the lecturer might even see them twice in the degree because our team is so small. So that's a positive. But of course, when you combine block with carousel, sort of hop on, hop off, there is a negative side to that, which is the cohort is changing all the time. Every term, a few people leave and a few people join. So there's 2 terms worth of people who are continuing and 1 term that are changing every time. That you could see that as a sort of interruption towards that sense of cohort community, but actually we are also finding, without necessarily pushing it ourselves, that there is a sort of buddying or mentoring that kind of presents itself there, where the students, even if they've only been in the cohort 1 term more than the others, they are still able to help them with their sort of onboarding. They are still able to advise them. And when you then add to that the fact that some of our more practical courses, people are coming in from industry, the new people coming in who've maybe been in work before they've come back to higher education at master's level anyway, they bring something new as well. So there's a kind of balancing of continuity and refreshing of the cohort, which is very, very interesting, actually.
Thanks, Mark. I was going to pick up, Jamie, if you don't mind. There's almost a follow-on question, and it's because I'm interested, because it speaks very much to the experience at NMIT that Dan put in the chat about, which started around contact hours. He's talking about they as an institution do 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. And Dan, if you're interested at NMIT, our students are expected to be, the ask is 9 to 5, Monday to Friday over a 7-week block, because everything happens in the studio, and that studio is theirs during. And it's the flip side of everyone's talked on the panel very much about student belonging, and the relationship that can be built within a block, within a cohort, and with the lecturer. And I'm almost going to flip that round to ask where we've got, or the follow-on question is, it can promote that, but do we think it's also asking something very different of our staff delivering within block? If you are with students in, it's a very different relationship that is built that has positives, but also places demands on academics. that I think is very different, and it's something we've been thinking a lot about at NMIT, that actually it's not something that's common across HE. So for somebody coming in from another institution to a block institution, you've got to get used to that, and it can mean a slightly different, I use the word emotional sort of load on, and I wondered if anyone had any perspectives on that and how they manage that and the support staff around that. Zoe first.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, that's a really good point. We learnt that quite a lot, and I think what we found, particularly in our first year of delivery, and the feedback we got sort of almost towards the end of our first block was sort of the sense from academics of, gosh, what a load this is. I'm the only person these students meet. So actually the person who was our sort of first person or first block, if you like, at level 4, almost became the face of the university for that whole cohort. So what we realised we needed to do was actually to make sure that there was more of that team approach. And some teams had done that really well because of how they designed the curriculum, and it was just due to almost sort of certain discipline areas. So really work on that and thinking about actually what does the student experience feel like, but with that the staff experience, so thinking about that angle. But also another piece of work we've done a lot more since is what we're calling sort of a modular handover, so that between staff. So some of the time that's coming in and talking to students, meeting them before they finish one block and then they move on to yours. So it could be as short and sweet as, oh, I'm really looking forward to seeing you, you'll pick up the bits you've learnt here and this is how we'll apply them, and, sort of a teaser as to what's to come. But also as well, behind the scenes, thinking about, things that you've learnt, things that have worked really well, methods that have worked in sort of taught sessions that have gone down really well, that kind of thing. So building in those handover periods between the blocks as well has been something that we've had to learn, and we wish we'd known first.
Thanks, Zoe. Mark.
Yeah, if I can just come back with two specific things from what Zoe's just said there. So on the sort of handover, we try to sort of, because the turnover, particularly in the first couple of years where we had some 15 credit modules, so they were very short blocks. We trying to build in feedback mechanisms as we go. So every week there will be a stop, start, keep, sort of segment of the session. And what we would do is we would invite, for the final week of that in any module, would invite the next module tutor to come into that, so that there was a little bit of continuity. And what we're doing, we move into the new curriculum from September, is really ensuring that now that postgrad courses, for instance, only have 4 taught modules, those 4 people are really working as a team when they design those new modules. So we don't have what can often happen in higher education, which everyone goes away and designs their module, what they want to teach. And then you worry afterwards about any replication or gaps. We're not doing that. We're really getting them to sit together and design them in a really sort of holistic way. So that's something that sort of is we've learned over the last couple of years, really. And then one other specific thing raised by what you just said, Zoe, was although we have block and we have carousel for our level 4 students, we do have the very first module off carousel. So all of our students who come in start with a module called Future Skills. And that module, which is actually designed and led by an academic skills lecturer, but it's team taught. And virtually everybody in my team teaches future skills at some point. So it is a genuine, as well as a part of the curriculum, is also a really good vehicle for staff development and standardization. And I don't mean standardization in terms of marking. I mean standardization in terms of all being on the same page about what we want for our students and how we onboard them into the institution. So that is a new thing starting in September, and we'll see how that contributes to that, as you said, Zoe, that almost who becomes the face of the university when they first start, because for the first 7 weeks, they're only really going to see that the person who's teaching them future skills.
It's really interesting, Mark. Thanks for that. Andrew wanted to come in.
Yeah, and just quickly, I mean, yeah, I agree with all of that. I think a team approach is really important, and the other reason why is so that there's someone else there at least who is familiar with with that particular module, and so if the staff is off sick, because that also can happen, you've got someone there who actually understands the context and can provide some more support. So that helps keep the show on the road, as it were. But I think it can be a heavy load on the academic leading that module in that intensive way. But partly the move to active learning is about placing more the emphasis on the learner as well. So it takes the pressure off that kind of, sometimes the academics will think they've got to be in that classroom with the students for like 6 hours or 7 hours. That's not the case. It's a different blend of activities, wrapped together to give people, time and space to do other things. So, but also the size of the subject team is important. So if you've got like a big subject team, like in business, for example, then it's easier to have a bit more team approach and people floating across different block modules. If you've got a small course team, there's more of a heavy load, and that is just the reality of the situation. But when you're moving like we are from the long and thin traditional model to a block model, then you've got staff who are grappling with teaching the old method and the new method for different year groups. And so you've got to be honest with people and say, there are benefits about staff workload and allocation and time, but they may not be clear for the first few years as you're moving through that process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. I'm just going to pick up that last question from in the chat and then we'll go for some final thoughts. I'm hoping I'm going to phrase this right. So Ryan, if I get this wrong, please do let me know. So thinking about how other institutions are integrating things like academic skills to the deployment and development of block delivery, what are other institutions doing to embed things like academic skills into their timetables? Would you like to have a go, Andrew, while you're there?
Well, I mean, Mark had a really good example there about that first module being focused on like those kickstarting skills, which I think is a really good approach. I think we've done a few different models depending on the subject. And we've just recently validated like health and social care to be a flexible lifelong learning entitlement modular delivery route as well as a traditional pathway. And that's been designed with academic skills embedded into each module. So people are engaging with those academic skills at the point they need to put them into practice for the first time. So, but there are different approaches depending on the subject, I think.
Zoe.
And I would echo that as well. We didn't go down the route, although Mark, I love the sound of that, having that dedicated time to do that. We didn't go down that route particularly. We tended to we had our sort of learning designers in with, I think it was Andrew that mentioned the sort of the sprint approach to kind of curriculum design. So we had them in that space to try and make sure it was sort of woven into the fabric of the course design. But I think it's one of those things that it hasn't necessarily worked brilliantly in all areas. In some cases, it's great. I think what we've realised is some areas have got lots of things woven in and some areas very little. So it's about getting the balance right. But I think also the need changes over time as well, and with cohorts and that kind of thing. So I think there is a case to be made for that regular review of what you've got sort of and your approach. And I think having sort of adaptive curriculum modification processes that allow you to recognise that and sort of make those changes where you can. So I think, as I say, we haven't necessarily got sort of solid modules. There are one or two where probably they're more sort of prescriptive externally that we needed to have specific skills modules, but it is woven through. And again, it does get picked up in our annual review approaches, and teams are always happy to look at how we can do this sort of in a better way based on feedback and things.
Wonderful. I'm just going to, because I'm conscious of time, we've got 5 minutes left, and I'd like to just go for the closing question, and feel free to jump on this, whoever would like to, but thinking about the next priority, where's the next focus area when advancing with block and intensive teaching at your institution? Go for it, Andrew.
I think for us, it would be, there's a few things. One is about lifelong learning entitlement and looking at what we can take from our new courses and how we would convert those or think about delivery of blocks for lifelong learning modules. Also, a really strong link into estates planning and learning and teaching spaces. So as we're moving things to block, understanding how that should impact on the learning and teaching estate. And also the quality impact assessment, which we undertook as we went into Block, but it's something which we committed to revisiting on an ongoing basis as we learn from doing it. So what we need to do or to put into place to support students and staff in ensuring we get the best out of Block through the quality impact assessment.
Thank you, Andrew. Mark, if you'd like to go next.
And yeah, I think for us, the next steps relate to the challenges around assessment. So in two areas, I think we have issues with assessment. One is in terms of from the student experience point of view, how do you avoid, how do you get the timing right of assessment? So currently we have 5 weeks of teaching, then we have a keep up catch up week, then we have the assessment week. But increasingly, the university is encouraging us to have more continuous assessment. When do you put that continuous assessment in? When is it too early because they haven't learnt enough yet? You combine that with restrictions around the number of learning outcomes that you can have in a module and the number of times that a learning outcome can be hit in different components. And you then combine that also with AI and the need to make sure that there is a live in-person component somewhere if possible. All of that is just slightly more pressured in a block teaching model. So that's the educational, the sort of pedagogical side of it. But then there is also a professional services administration side. So we've encountered students who problems with students who fail and need to repair, because in the efficiency of block is do it, pass it, move on to the next one. As soon as you get a student who is struggling and is not passing, what then happens often is they get a different kind of assessment bunching where they're repairing a failure at the same time as the next module has already started. And that has obviously consequences for the student, but it also has a lot of kind of operational things to work through with registry and academic services, etc.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And Zoe, last but not least.
So I think the big thing for us is thinking ahead to the future is what next really for our applicants and our students. What offer is really going to continue to meet their needs. And with that, I think that's aligned with sort of sector approaches and changes and challenges as well that I'm sure we're all too aware of. For me as a researcher looking at this now, it's about actually what evaluation can we do, what review can we do to look at this more broadly, and that's always with a view on how can we do events like this where we can get people talking about block and is it the right thing for you, and all those things that we've lived through, that if we can help you by warning you that there are lovely hurdles that may come your way, then it's great to have the opportunity to speak to colleagues about that.
Wonderful. Emma, have you got any last thoughts that you would like to give us all?
The only thing I wrote down, and it's something that John Weldon said is, and I often think about it when you're talking about block, and as Zoe said, when you're sharing with colleagues, this is how it worked for us, and these are the hurdles we've come across, or interested to hear what's happened elsewhere, is John Weldon, who I said is doing the research, once said, I think is block may not have the answers, but it certainly asks the right questions about teaching and learning in the modern day. And I think that's a really good point to make.
Yeah, and funnily enough, for my conference bit, when I was talking about block on Thursday, that was one of my opening questions. So I'm glad that it's now resonating, that question around what questions can be asked. So I just would like everybody to join in a bit of a virtual applause. If you could find the reaction button